Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for this version of Village Voices, where I'm here today with Alex Scharf, who is our Economic Development Coordinator. Alex, when did you join Orland Park?
I started with the Village of Orland Park in July of 2020, so I've been here for about 8 months now.
And for those that don't know, one of the reasons that Alex came on board is because during my first several years, there was little to no support. For example, when we did the Amazon bid, which really put our I-80 corridor on the map, I was completely on my own. I had to do all the development, I had to do all the marketing, I had to do everything. I had to do all the data collection. And with all the other mayor's responsibilities, running and getting data and creating marketing videos and doing all that is probably not the best use of the mayor's time. So we realized that we could add Alex, and we did so without adding a position. We actually reclassified a position so that Alex could work in our Development Services Department. So far, how's that going, Alex?
It's going really good. I've come on board and I really enjoy it.
One of the things that we realized during my first 3 years is that we really needed data that we didn't have. And I know one of the first things we talked about is identifying some data sources that we could use. Could you tell us a little bit about the data that we now have that we didn't have in the past?
Yeah, I think one of the main ones we have is called Placer AI, and it's a platform that tracks customer foot traffic data. So as people come to our different shopping centers and travel from outside our village into our village, we can actually track and understand the metrics behind that. One of the best examples we've taken a hard look at is the Orland Square Mall. And it's great to see what some of the data tells us about how strong the mall is. The mall ranks in the top 1% of all shopping centers in the entire United States in terms of foot traffic, people visiting that mall versus other shopping centers. So it's in the top 1% in Illinois, top 1% in the US, and even on a more local basis, 15 miles, 30 miles, it's in the top 1%.
And could you demonstrate for us, for example, how we pull that information and then also, kind of shows the trade area of the Orland Square Mall?
Sure, yeah. Well, Placer AI is an online platform that we use and we all have access to at the village. We can run reports based off certain places, whether it's the village as a whole or individual shopping centers. And so when we run it for Orland Square Mall, it shows you a variety of different metrics. The first thing you can see is how many people are actually visiting that mall within a 6-month span, 12-month span. You can look at a year such as the year 2017 or the year 2020. So when we're looking at the data that's available to us right now, it shows that in the last 6 months, we've had 3.22 million people visit Orland Square. And as we mentioned, it's in the top 1%, but I think what's a great indicator as well is that there's another shopping center just to the south, Orland Park Place, that's in the top 2% of all shopping centers in the entire United States, Illinois, local radius. So not only do you have Orland Square that's strong, but directly next door, you would almost think competing with it, you have another shopping center that's doing remarkably well as well.
So that indicates how strong Orland Park is. And I know you come from St. Louis was where
Correct.
Your last location was. So how do you think that Orland Park stacks up relative to what you've seen in other places and nationally?
Very well. I mean, you're in Chicago land area, Chicago's backyard, part of that suburban area, and it does really well when you talk about anything from data, but also just the feel and what's going on. One of my first days here, I drove around with you and some others at the village and got to see just the amount of activity and shopping and dining and entertainment, and it's remarkable to see it. And then when you look at some of the data behind it, it really stacks up well. I think it reflective of that top 1% shopping center you can see and feel as you go around the community.
And that drive-through was in July, actually,
right.
when COVID was happening, and so you still noticed that.
Correct.
So speaking of COVID, we know that we've offered a lot of incentives.
Sure.
Can you walk everyone through all of the incentives that we're offering to businesses for COVID? And one of the reasons that we're doing that is because I recognize that we are in a very strong position financially, and while COVID has slowed things up nationally, we need to take advantage of that strong position, and so we're offering these incentives. And if you could speak to what those incentives are.
Sure, and my knowledge of is that the village in June, so even before I started, passed a series of incentives, a package of COVID-19 related development incentives to help local businesses and incoming businesses be able to move forward with projects even during this difficult time. So you had everything from a local tax sharing incentive with existing businesses in the community that I believe was for 90 days and a 50-50 sharing to help get them some cash when they really needed it. And then on top of that, we do a variety of other programs. One, for example, is the backfill vacant restaurant incentive. So we had some vacant restaurant spaces. There was a restaurant that was willing to come into town, invest money into that facility, bring it back online and start producing revenue and tax revenue there. Then the village was willing to share a certain percentage of that with them to be an incentive for them to come into that spot.
So this is a performance-based incentive, so money that they generate, we share some of that back, but if they don't generate anything, then they don't get anything. So can you give us some examples of restaurants that have taken it already and opened, and others that have committed to coming?
Sure, yeah, I think the most famous one that's probably everybody's already heard of is Stan's Donuts off of LaGrange Road, and they've been interested in the market before, but were never able to make something fit. And then whenever we were able to connect with them and talk about their project, the location they wanted, and the gap that they needed to fill, we were able to use that backfill vacant restaurant incentive to help them meet it and come into town. So obviously, if you drive by there and go there, there's always a line, always people there, which is great to see. We've got a couple others that are in the works that have been approved for the incentive and are getting ready to open. So we have Clean Eats, also off of LaGrange. And then we also have Tequila Los Camales going on Harlem. So we've had a few that have taken advantage of it, and we get a lot of people that are interested in it and trying to see where and how they can make it work in some of those vacant restaurant spaces.
And Clean Eats is actually what, top 5 of new restaurant chains throughout
the franchise ranks very high in terms of the kind of new restaurants on the market and how they're expanding and growing. So it's a very new idea. It's a health food concept, and I'm excited to see it come in and how it does.
So it's something very different than what we have already.
Exactly.
And then I understand as well, they have not applied for the incentive yet, but we've seen online that, and we know that they've already signed a lease for the old Twin Peaks sites, a place called Juicy Seafood out of Indianapolis.
There's a seafood place that's looking at that spot and has reached out here and there and is trying to make it work. And they've announced that they want to go into it. So we're having ongoing discussions like that, and we receive a lot of inquiries, and it's about figuring out which projects can go forward with some of these projects and which ones can't.
And what other incentive programs, give us some examples of some others that we have right now.
Another one is the Commercial Impact Program, and that's something that helps take off the burden that's, as projects come into town and are working with our development services department, they have to pay fees in order to get permits and have our staff be able to do reviews. And the Commercial Impact Program allows for a 25% discount on those permit fees as well as water tap fees. And it also defers the payment from the point of application to once they occupy. So that burden of paying that payment to the village doesn't happen until they're ready to occupy the space, which can be nice for them because it's one less thing coming out of their pocket when they're not producing any revenue.
And one of the things we get asked all the time about what new businesses are coming, et cetera, and everyone knows about Von Maur and how they came. And Von Maur expects potentially that this store will be their #1 store in their whole chain. And they were killing it in their first 3 months, and then of course COVID hit, so that's changed things a little bit for them. But they're still very, very optimistic about our site, and it's still being their best location throughout the country once it gets fully up and running. What other businesses are coming here that people should be excited about that have committed or we've committed incentive packages to already?
Yeah, so we've had a variety. Two of the bigger ones that people probably heard of, we have Pete's Fresh Market coming in off of LaGrange. It's going to be an anchor tenant at a shopping complex that should help revitalize the whole location there. And they're coming in utilizing a inducement agreement that utilizes that performance-based sales tax sharing incentive along with the Commercial Impact Program. And they're going through their planning process now, working with village staff to help bring that project online. We also have Angelo Caputo's Fresh Markets going in off of 159th in a different location, but also that'll serve as that anchor tenant for that shopping plaza, and similar concepts there with the incentives they're using. A sales tax sharing that's strictly performance-based, as you mentioned, so as they produce sales, they get a share in the sales tax that they're producing on site, and then also the Commercial Impact Program, which helps reduce those fees.
And during COVID, we had a lot of businesses come in relatively quickly. For example, Pete's Fresh Market was very quickly. Caputo's was within weeks of Burcott's exiting.
And it was able to come together very quickly because they saw the potential and knew that the village was willing to support them to make this project happen.
And another example is the Walgreens on 159th. within 3 months, I believe, Dollar Tree opened in there. So we have a track record of really being able to backfill some very large spaces. And in your experience, is that something that you see throughout the rest of the country?
Unfortunately not. It's not exactly apple to apples all the time, but you definitely see as spaces get closed, a lot of people wonder how they're going to fill 30,000 square feet. Retail has obviously been impacted pre-COVID with the emergence of online sales in different formats, and COVID really accelerated that. But it's been amazing to see kind of the resilience of Orland Park in terms of just staying within that top tier percentile of comparisons versus other locations, as we're able to see with Placer AI.
And since COVID has started, you've seen a lot of these businesses be added even with COVID, but what have you seen throughout, when you look back at how things have gone the last several years and you look at Orland Park relative to others, because I know you've done that. You've done that look back
it helps
research.
me understand the community I'm coming to work for to see the activity they've had over the years. And I believe since 2017, 16, 18, in that range, we've seen, roughly 500 new businesses come online within the community during that time. Each year, the permit numbers are very high. I know, amazingly, everybody thinks COVID, there was this massive slowdown in terms of development activity in Orland Park, and it's just not necessarily the case when you look at the numbers. In 2020, we actually had more permits submitted to Orland Park than in 2019. The mix of residential versus commercial was probably different, more residential, less commercial, but overall numbers, more than 2019. And if 2021 January is any indication, this year is going to be very busy for economic development and development services.
That's great news, and of course we all know that throughout the region that's not the case.
Correct.
So not only are we doing well, but the region is being decimated, and we're still thriving.
Right.
That's great to hear. Well, anything else you'd like to say in closing?
Just that I'm excited to be working for Orland Park. It's been a great 6+ months here so far, and we've got a lot on the horizon in terms of initiatives. A lot of this data we're putting together to do a market assessment for the Village leadership to be able to view and make some decisions on the strategic plan for economic development going forward. So that's an exciting project. We're going to have an economic development website coming online. That's going to be a one-stop shop for all the businesses and developers that are interested in our market, and even existing businesses that are interested in connecting with us, because we want to hear from them and know what's going on in our backyard. So those are just a couple of projects that are on the way.
Well, it's great to have you on board, and I'm glad we got you on board when we did, because obviously there's a transition happening with the mayor's position where it's going to part-time. So we've been able to put a lot of things in place by working together that would be a little bit more difficult in the future when the mayor's in a part-time basis. But going forward, we'll be able to handle that because we have all of the data, all the marketing, all these tools developed that weren't previously.
Yeah, and as you know, everybody sees the headline and the project happening, but there's a lot of work that goes into that, from the economic development side through the building permit side and all of it. And you being involved in that process, I think you've seen how much work goes into making these things happen.
Yeah, and it can take 3, 4, 8 years to get something on board, and we've been able to fill spaces like Carson's left in September of 2017, and we closed the deal on Bauer in October.
Right.
Sears left, we closed the deal with AMC.
Caputo's seemed like a few weeks.
Caputo's was a few weeks. Pete's Fresh Market was a couple of months, and then also the one thing we didn't talk about is all the medical facilities that are coming.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in medical office right now around some of our other structures that are currently vacant, old office buildings, maybe even some old retail. So we're getting some interest on that level, and they're looking at some different incentive programs to help with some of those costs of transitioning some older buildings into new office space. So we're really hopeful that will kind of come to fruition more and more as we continue on into 2021, and hopefully the trends we're seeing with the impact of COVID continue to improve.
Well, Alex, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for joining us for this edition of Village Voices.